mate of mine recently passed on. We'll miss him. He once knew this place well. It's the old A&A terminal at Essendon Airport.
When he finally retired, he had just under 37,000 flying hours to his credit. Many of them from this Essendon terminal in the faithful old DC-3s. No other Australian can approach him in commercial hours flown. Only one other in the world is in front of him, an American with 40,000 flying hours. Jason's flying career began at this field near Lismore, New South Wales, in the late 20s. It was from here that he participated as an airline captain in each step from Virtues Air Travel to Ansett Airlines of Australia. This portion of Robertson's Farm was once home base for Virtues Air Travel and New England Airways. Flights originated from here to Sydney, Brisbane, Townsville and Isa. And as can be seen, Robinson's drome was having a busy day. Jace was taught to fly by his uncle, Keith Virtue, in this Gypsy Moth. He obtained his pilot's licence at 17 and his commercial licence at 19. These were the balmy days of flying when the pilots wore leather coats and helmets. They flew without radar, radio or nav aids. Just their own judgment. Jace called it the DFL method, down for a look, with railway lines and rivers your guide and compass. Things were anything but dull flying for Virtues Air Travel. Charter flights, business flights between Sydney and Brisbane for the wool sales, joy flights from the beaches between Evans Head and Coolangatta at 5 shillings a go for daring passengers desiring aerial thrills. And of course, air pageants throughout Queensland and New South Wales to help promote air travel. Virtues then became New England Airways, and Jace flew charter flights and newspaper runs in the Puss Moth and 3-passenger Ryan, which was similar to the famous Lindbergh model. The Generco and Jason had their ups and downs. He won local air pageant races in this machine. A stir was caused when he arrived after dark at Mascot, landing with the aid of hastily assembled kerosene flares. A headwind had slowed him down while bringing photos of that day's Brisbane cricket test for the Sydney papers. Mention of his amazing after-dark touchdown was made in next day's dailies. The only serious accident of his career happened with the Generco while coming into land on this beach at Evans Head, New South Wales. He was caught in a wind shear at 300 feet, had no time to recover and dropped onto a sand dune, close to the Life Savings Club, wrecking the plane. He again made the newspapers. New England expanded and purchased 3 Avro 10s, UPI and UNJ from Queensland Air Navigation, and UMH, the ex-Southern Sky from Kingsford Smith's A&A liquidation sale. With these deals, larger hangars were acquired at Sydney and Brisbane, and home base moved away from Lismore. Jason's favourite Avro was UNJ. Lawrence Wackett had modified this by replacing the rear skid with a tail wheel and enclosed the side cockpit windows, which protected the pilots from the elements, and company uniforms were worn for the first time. The noise in these 3-engined fabric-covered machines was unbelievable. You communicated by writing notes. Brisbane to Sydney, fully loaded, took at least 6 hours. Remembering the Avro's lack of instruments and thinking of the Townsville-Isa trip, where all you see is scrub and more scrub, I once asked, in those early days, how on earth did you find Isa? Easy, said Jace, just followed the railway lines. Next came the ST-12 monospars. Jace flew these new twin-engined 3-passenger machines which cruised at 130 mile an hour on the Sydney to Townsville coastal route. He was also in one of these, the Captain Phillip, during the famous 1936 air race, which started at Brisbane and finished at Adelaide, calling en route at Sydney, Melbourne and Nil. Another competitor was a chap called Reg Ansett, who with his brother won the race and was Jason's employer in later years. Also in the 30s, Jace flew the de Havilland Dragon, the Rapide, and larger 4-engined DH-86. Additional capital was injected into New England Airways and it became Airlines of Australia. 4 tri-motor Stinson A's were purchased from America. These aggressive-looking fabric-covered machines had retractable undercarriage with donut tyres, cockpit with illuminated instruments and central controls, passenger cabin with comfortable seats for 8 people, even landing lights in the wings. Introduced ahead of the DC-2s and Lockheed 10s, they revolutionised Australian air travel, offering passengers a new standard in speed, comfort and convenience. Jason flew with Keith Virtue on the first commercial Sydney-Brisbane Stinson flight. With a stopover at Lismore, time taken was 3 hours 10 minutes, compared with over 6 hours in the noisy old Avro 10s. One of Jason's famous moments happened in the Stinson while flying Brisbane-Sydney. Lightning hit the trailing aerial situated beside his cockpit seat. When the smoke cleared, he found that a large part of his trousers had been burnt off. Luckily, no bodily damage was done. AOA later lost 2 of the Stinsons through accidents, one at Lavington Plateau and the other while taking off in fog at Archerfield. Next on the scene were the new all-metal 14-passenger Douglas DC-2s, which in their time were well advanced on any other commercial aircraft in the world. AOA purchased 2 of these mighty machines. Then came the famous DC-3, at first carrying 21 passengers, and at this stage AOA merged with Melbourne-based ANA. Air hostesses were now a part of the scene, and even meals were served in flight. Wartime, and he flew the rare DC-5. Only 12 of these were ever built. And he used the new tricycle undercarriage and nose wheel steering for the first time. Also during the war, with other ANA crew, he flew Lockheed Lodestars and converted DC-3s across to New Guinea and the Pacific Islands for the Americans. They airlifted troops and equipment across to the war zone, dropped urgently needed supplies to the troops below, and brought back the wounded to Australia. The end of the war saw him back flying, this time down south with Melbourne-based ANA at Essendon Airport. After stints on the DC-3 and noisy Bristol Freighter, or Bristol Frightener as he used to call it, he went on to the larger DC-4, which carried 44 passengers. Pillows and blankets for warmth and comfort always featured in the cabin overhead racks of these cold, unpressurised aircraft of the 50s. ANA provided 2 DC-4s and crews for Air Ceylon to fly the Melbourne to London route. Jason, third left, flew on the opening flight. Next he graduated to the DC-6 and DC-6B, ANA's first pressurised aircraft. And ANA then became Ansett Airlines of Australia. With the arrival of the new 727 and DC-9, he decided that the jet course was not for him and remained with piston-engined aircraft. He then flew the DC-4 Carvair, which he disliked, and DC-4 Cargo Masters until he retired from Ansett in 1968. At the Ansett farewell dinner, he has a beer with Huey Bond and Doug Barker. A total of 71,550 hours flown between the 3 of them. And tells a story or two. Next day's Melbourne Herald devoted a half page to his retirement and pioneering achievements. And of course, his greatest thrill was to receive the MBE for his services to aviation. Well done, Jace.
After leaving Ansett, Jason joined Essendon-based Brain and Brown and flew air freight overseas to Tasmania and King Island in the ageing DC-3s. There is a voice tape of Jace leaving Essendon and B&B's DC-3 Bravo Alpha Alpha. Air Express's Bristol Sierra Juliet Golf has just left before him. Jace, of course, had helped pioneer Australian aircraft radio, and at this stage of life, jet age procedure didn't really interest him. He just chats his way out of the area. The controller even calls him Jace.
Alpha, remain this frequency here, boy. If it take off, make right turn. Alpha, right. Yeah, Bravo Alpha, you still on this figure? Bravo Alpha, all anything I think so. Call departures, fulminate decimal letter. Bravo Alpha, and carry on. Cheers. Melbourne departures, Bravo Alpha, table. Bravo Alpha, this is Melbourne departures, identify. Bravo Alpha. What height is this going at? 5.5. We'd like to cruise 3500, any traffic? Bravo Alpha, confirms 3500. Good Alpha, affirmative. Bravo Alpha, stand by. Cruise emitted altitude 3500. Bravo Alpha, 3500.
One cold winter's night, halfway back from Tassie, he thought to himself, what am I doing here? I've had enough of this. After clocking up an amazing 36,950 hours in the air and flying such a variety of planes commercially, he captained the DC-3 into Essendon for the last time.
After Jace retired from B&B, his interest in aircraft never diminished. Over the years, we went to air shows at Laverton, Point Cook, Berwick and Penfield. Amazing how many people would come up and talk to him about the good old days. Typical Jace. He could never remember their names though.
If any interesting aircraft came into the area, we'd go up and see them. We went and saw the old Catalina, the new de Havilland Dash 8, visiting American DC-6, and sat up in the cockpit. The replica Fokker from Smithy's film.
Now, Jace,
Yeah.
you flew these in what, 1930?
Yeah.
1930, something like that?
30, 33, 34.
34, right, right.
That's 50 years ago.
Yeah, 50 years ago. Since you, say you were going from Brisbane to Sydney, did you do that route or?
Yeah.
And how long would that take? About, what?
5 or 6 hours.
5 to 6 hours.
Yeah.
And what did you have, about 6 to 8 passengers on it or what?
8 persons.
8 passengers generally, yeah.
And one in the cockpit with us.
Did you really? Yeah. Did you have pilot and co-pilot or did...
No, there was provision for it, but we didn't.
You didn't, you just had one pilot?
Yeah. And
Right.
if there was an extra passenger, we'd stick him up in.
Yeah, yeah.
Also DC-3 ABR, which he'd flown many times, and the vintage DC-2. Six weeks before he died, we went out to Fogarty's field at Melton and saw what remained of the old vandalised DC-4. This was once Ansett VH-INX. Jace, of course, had flown this particular aircraft. His logbook showed the last time was a flight from Adelaide to Melbourne. In fact, he'd flown 4s all round Australia and further afield to London and Vancouver. He really enjoyed himself this day. Checked the brakes and the undercarriage, kicked the tyres. We had hoped to make a video about fours in Australia, but unfortunately time ran out. Penny for your thoughts, Jace.
Over departures, Bravo Alpha Alpha cable. Bravo Alpha Alpha, this is Melbourne departures identified. Bravo Alpha. What height is this we're going at?